Hey guys, this is the second episode of Friend Fridays. It's going to be a new weekly show where I showcase one of my friends that I find interesting.
Boyfriends.
We have life partner, Sinister Monopoly. He paints me in the nude, and we just fell in love, dude. After hours and hours of eye contact, he's just like, dude, I think I love you. Your writing is so bomb. I'm like, dude, your painting's so bomb. Let's get an apartment. And now we live in Torrance.
I love shopping for curtains.
Oh yeah, we shot for curtains together. We get our initials embroidered. But admittedly, last week we were at a $100 million property. We were at his place, just throwing guap around like it wasn't shit. And now we're at the studio. We have better production value, and I'm gonna keep it that way from this point forward. One of the reasons that I chose Sinister Monopoly as the first person, my inaugural Friend Friday candidate. It's like not an election. I don't know why I said it like that. Why I chose to showcase him in particular is I'm a big fan of his art. And I'm also a fan of the fact that he nurtured his inherent skill in prison. I can relate. When I was in prison, writing was my thing. I focused on that. I tried to get as good at it as possible before I got out. He did the same with painting. And before he went to prison, he had a very fascinating life. He was making between $1 to $5 million a month. That's kingpin level cannabis money. Most of us, regardless of what we say, have never seen that kind of money. We've never been around people that were doing it on that level. To get 10 years of your life taken by the feds, go to prison, nurture those painting abilities, and come out as a world-celebrated artist, it gets commissioned for paintings by A-list celebrities, is something to be quite proud of, and he's getting a cult.
It's worth like 4 times.
He's getting a cult following. Anyway,
all right, let's go.
We're gonna start where we left off last time, and I'm just gonna give him the mic. There you go.
You don't want to ask me questions?
No, just
what's my favorite color?
What's your favorite color, Sinister?
It's like turquoise.
Yeah, that's not 5.
No. So I think we left off. We were talking a little bit about money laundering. Why not, right?
The fruits of money laundering. Yes,
Yeah.
Let's get back into that.
We had discussed that I had purchased a home, and I would hire the construction guys to come through, pay them in cash, and when the house sells for $2 million, it all gets dumped into a bank account, and now it's like clean and good. Now you can go buy another house, and you're legit. But I think we kind of already went over that, so we'll kind of get further into.
But just so I understand
progression.
that, and so that I think other people understand that. So what you're saying is you would buy a property to tear it down, to rebuild it, because there's no way to audit the honest prices of how much each individual facet of that house is.
Right. So let's say, I bought a house for $900,000, and I probably put like another $700 into building it.
But how does that work if the money's dirty to begin with? Like how do you go about buying a property that's that expensive when the money's not washed initially?
Well, no, I could make deposits through like every few days of $8,500, $9,000 back then.
Okay.
It was easier. Now, from what I understand, you can't really even bring cash like $5,000 before they ask you to write out a form. But back then there was no form, so I could go, literally, every day, every couple days, $8,500, $9,200. As long as it's under $10,000 back then.
Okay, so you weren't going up to a realtor and being like, look, I have 900 racks.
No, like I didn't purchase the home outright. So
okay.
I just put down probably back then I think a 10,000 or 10%.
10%. So
Yeah,
you
10%.
put 90 down?
I don't recall on that property, but more than likely.
Okay.
So, and then if we can kind of backtrack, I think we were kind of talking a little bit about when I first started taking my cannabis that I was importing from Canada to out of state. And the first place I dropped it in was Chicago. I'm not sorry, Chicago, Detroit. And so as Detroit started becoming really, really profitable, then I would, like, let's say I would come to your house, or when I was more hands-on with my customers, I would hit them up, local people in LA, and say, hey, do you know anyone that maybe you grew up with, like your cousin, your brother, somebody that you really, truly know, and in another state, and let's try to see if we can, do business, that I have ways of, transporting, some cannabis to, like, really any location at that point.
What year are we at now on the timeline, just to get the chronology down for people in case you're wondering?
Probably 2008, maybe.
2008. So this is the time. Are you dealing with just illicit marijuana brokers, or are you dealing with dispensaries, or is it a mix of both?
So when I would send it out of town, I developed like it's kind of like any business. You have your manager, and somebody, and then you have the downward positions of employees. So I would pick somebody. So the next location that I started after Detroit was Chicago. And so what I would do is I would maybe, let's say, bring 200 pounds to Chicago, and maybe at that time I might only have 3 or 4 customers, nothing major, but I wouldn't have, my pilot, my transportation go and see 3 or 4. So I would develop one person, and he would see the pilot, and then I tell that one person, like, hey, I can give you $100, $200 to drop them to my customer, as well as they take them to their own customers,
Okay.
So it's kind of like a person that would like a safe house. They would control the main load, right?
And then they had people that worked below them. So
they had their own customers, and then I would pay them to go and see my customers.
Okay. But with the original question, are they dealing with dispensaries? Are you giving?
No. All of these areas at that time didn't have any type of legal.
Because we're talking about the Midwest.
Although I think later on, eventually, when I got the FBI caught onto me, Detroit, Michigan, did start to have like legalized dispensaries, like medicinal, medical. You had to have your car.
Right.
That wasn't initially when I first brought it there, but eventually that got implicated into Michigan, and that actually even affected the market and drove the price down. So now my customers in Detroit are like, hey, I'm having difficulties, moving them. So before they could move some so fast, I'd shoot it to them, and
How much are we talking about?
I would generally drop maybe like 100 pounds on them, and they would get back to me like every week and a half, 2 weeks.
And just to reiterate from last time, just so we can like catch back up, what were you getting 100 pounds for, and what were you selling them? You were getting the 100 pounds from the guys in Canada, who you'd brought the clones to.
Yeah.
So they were producing the high quality indoor herb in Canada. Mm-hmm. You were bringing it back into the United States, and you were selling 100 pounds at a time to the Midwest. How much were you getting the 100 pounds for, and how much were you selling it for?
So I would get it on my end at like $3,200, and I would send it to Detroit and charge them. Sometimes, like I think in the beginning, it might have been like $5,500, but then I brought it down to like $52,000.
So all the way up, so a $500,000 deal, cash deal.
No, more than that.
More than that.
Yeah.
5,200. Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's
basically, most of the time it was right around like 900,000, I think, is what they owed me.
Wow.
So,
and how, like, when you deal with money on that level, something that I've never done, I sound like such a fucking fed right now. Mm-hmm. How does that work? I mean, when you're doing almost $1 million deal, how do you even? That takes up a lot of space. That much cash. Like, what do you do? Duffel bags full of cash?
Yeah, so back then, the pilot would bring money back. And most of the time, the pilot would meet me. I would do our transaction up the street at a hotel near my house. At the time, I lived in Manhattan Beach. And I always preferred to, if we're going to what I call like throw bags around, why not make it look like it's more like normal to be at a hotel parking lot with like luggage.
Yeah. Okay.
So oftentimes it would be in like, you know, something like a regular luggage bag that you buy at like a Target with wheels on it, you know?
But like a big
one,
duffel
yeah.
bag with wheels. Okay.
And dude, when you have that much money in there, the bag is actually pretty heavy, dude. So even sometimes like loading it into my car, I'll be like, oh shit, you know, like, you know.
How much would you say $1 million cash weighs?
I don't know, but I would probably estimate like 20 pounds or something.
Wow.
It seems pretty heavy when I was throwing it in my car. So, and then the pilot, what he was doing at that time, he would take out the entire expense, you know, like airplane gas, hotel, rent a car, like whatever his expense was, I paid that, and that didn't come off of, you know, his profit.
Generally, like, what are we talking, like 10 grand or something?
Yeah, maybe even less. Like he would come back and say, oh, you know, I took out 6,000 for, you know, expenses like in the real world per diem,
Okay.
you know, or expense account. So he would do that, and then at that time, I was probably paying him, like, I feel like I was just killing it, bro. Like I was giving him $100 on a pound to transport. So if he would take 100, he was really only making like, you know, 10 G's.
Wow.
You know?
And, okay, and I think we went over this last time, but was there a certain denomination that it had to be? Did you take hundreds, or are we talking about some of it was 20s, 50s?
Yeah, so real quick, as the initial airplane that this person had, he kept wanting to put in more, and I wanted to put in more, you know? And so as I expanded into other, we'll say, you know, business terms, demographics, right? So I would started going into Detroit, and then Chicago, and then Atlanta. And so as I was in those areas, we outgrew his airplane. So he referred to it, he nicknamed it, and he would call it the putt-putt. And he would say, like, I have to gas up too many times, I can't get above the clouds, and it takes him sometimes like a few days to get there because you don't fly at nighttime. So he's up, down, and he's just putting. He's like in a little Cessna, you know? And so he kept saying...
And how much at a time?
Well, I guess probably when I started taking him to all 3 locations, probably somewhere around 300 pounds.
Is there a certain point with weight on that level where you get a price break? Is there a certain tier? Like, if you go...
For him, no, it was
just
$100 per pound.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is good because, you know, like now...
30 grand for...
If you think about it, I'm paying $3,300 for the pound, and I'm offering it at $5,200.
Okay, yeah. So
I'm still cleaning up, like, really well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so he came to me and said, I need he called it a bigger, better, faster airplane. And he didn't have, which struck me as weird because he made decent money. He didn't have the money to buy it. And so he asked me if I would buy it and we could work out a payment plan, you know, like whatever the scenario was, and he'll make payments back to me. So I bought an airplane for him, and I think it was around $170,000. It was a Beechcraft dual prop turbo, and so that allowed him to, you know, get above the clouds, gas up fewer times, and at that point, it really opened up the demographic for me to take it all the way to New York.
And this is Canada. Oh, he would drive, or he would fly within the country? This was just from Canada to California?
No, this particular pilot had, at that moment, didn't have anything to do with anything in relation to Canada.
Okay, so this was just all within the United States.
So he would come down to, like, my area, like Manhattan Beach.
Yeah.
And I would meet him at the hotel. And I would shoot him duffel bags where I had, like either duct tape on them, and I would name the city. Like the Detroit was like the Lions, the football team. So I would write on the duffel bag, Lions. Chicago was Wendy's, and I would write on the duffel bag, Wendy's. And Atlanta, I forget what I named. It was probably something with an A, like Alice or whatever. Sometimes it was trying to be like a female name. So if you're like, oh, you're gonna go to, Allen's or something like that or whatever it was.
Right. Yep.
I don't recall. It's so many years now, but
And you're still using that encrypted BlackBerry at this time?
I use that with the Canadians.
Okay, so
because this particular pilot was old, right? And he's probably like in his 60s. So he's not really savvy with the whole texting and encrypted phone. So he had a prepaid.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he could carry about 300 pounds. And at that point, I opened up all of these markets. I opened up Chicago and Atlanta and Detroit, and I was rocking and rolling. And so, like I said before, the pilot would go into an area in like Chicago, and I would have him meet one person.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, hey, when you touch down, hypothetically go meet Ryan. And he and then so when the pilot would get into town, he would always use the term, I'm all tucked in, meaning he had all the bags in his hotel room. He had like his rent-a-car, and he was all ready to go. So then I would call my customer, and I referred to, like, hey, I had a nickname for the pilot. He's there. Here's his number. You guys call and, do your thing. And so somebody, my customer would call the pilot, probably cruise to the hotel, pick up their 100, and then when they would take it back to their spot, I would maybe say, like, hey, bro, are you cool with going to see some of my people? And so even if I had a new customer, like say you're in Chicago, and I could tell my dude in Chicago, I could say, hey, just run over one. He wants to see if he likes it. You know what I mean? And so not many people, can have the opportunity to have something so far away and just give them like one. You know what I mean? Like, who's going to send fucking Bud to Chicago and give somebody one? But because I would give somebody 100 and then delegate to them, like, go shoot Ryan 1, go shoot this other dude, a 10-pack, go and shoot him 20. And then the person I would dump it on, they had their own clientele. But in addition to their own clientele, they made money off being a runner.
How'd you get hooked up with people in other cities like that? Are these just connections you made here in California? Or?
So, yeah, like what I mentioned, if I knew you in LA, I would say, like, do you have somebody you could truly know is like solid, like a family member, a dude you grew up with in high school? Like, has anybody moved out of the area? And so, through like Chicago with me, it was like a family connection. And then a couple of my bros, they knew other people. And so I didn't have a whole lot of people there. And in the end, like 100 pounds is not that much, right, in one area. One dude gets 10, another dude gets 5, and it goes pretty quick, And so as I opened up the Chicago area, I did have one dude that was really good who I didn't even have to front him. He would instantly just COD. He already had, and that's like a beautiful thing, Nowadays, like a lot of people, you have to COD, but back then, if you had someone that COD'd, it was like the golden child, like, dude, it's like great customer. I just show up and he cashes you out. So so I had Chicago, and it was a really, really like a cool area. I used to travel out there every once in a while.
And you lived in that house in Manhattan Beach at the time?
Yeah.
We kind of went into what you were spending money on, but what did your life look like back then? Because I think that, what interests me about it is that you were making more money than I've ever even seen, and especially illicit money where it's liquid cash and you can do what you want. I know you said a lot of it was on paper owed to you, so it fluctuated a lot. But
sure.
What was your lifestyle like? Like, what did a day-to-day life, what did your day-to-day look like, and what kind of things were you wasting money on?
So one of them was when I started to build the house.
Okay.
I was doing a lot. I would go to the city. I pulled my own permits, did an owner-builder, and I basically was the contractor myself. And I would hire all of my own crew, like I would say, I need my electrician, I need my plumber. And so I had a Harley. I'd ride my Harley over to this. I had a house that I was building like 2 blocks from where I lived. So I'd ride over there and check on it and be like, hey, where's the floor? I've ordered the marble for this. And really just like, interacting on my encrypted phone, navigating like another load coming in, working on like paying these Canadians their money, and just kind of like delegating this house being built. But other than that, I just spent money on, I've always been really into like motorcycles, dirt bikes, street bikes, Harleys, boats. And then I've always been like an X game person, go snowboarding, surfing, so I don't know that there's one thing that I really just spent like crazy money on. I always had like convertible Porsche, turbo, whatever this, the basics, right?
Was the end goal to sell the house to legitimize that money? You were laundering that money that way?
For sure.
Okay, all right.
Well, no, to some degree I thought, well, this is cool, I know people that are developers in the city of Manhattan in the South Bay, and there's a lot of money to be made, like you bulldoze a house, maybe takes you 9 months to build a new one, and, you can make a significant amount of profit in, selling a new construction home. So when I did that, my aspiration was to eventually become a builder, like a dope dealer on the side. Like if I maybe got introduced to you, I wouldn't tell you I'm a dope dealer. I'd say, yeah, I'm a developer.
Developer, would you refurbishment or just complete builds?
Complete build.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I had fun. I lived a good life.
How old were you in this period? This is
probably
2008.
Somewhere around like 35. I'm somewhere around there.
Okay. And were you doing drugs at the time?
I would go through phases. There was a time where I was like sober for a long period of time.
While you were selling, or
yeah, and I feel like that elevated my income.
Of course,
and then I got kind of sucked into traveling. It started becoming fun, and then I would land in Atlanta, like, oh, I'm in a new environment, so now I'm going to go out. I started meeting people. And it just kind of like led to, maybe drinking and smoking. So it eventually kind of like trickled into my life. But there were times where I've spent probably even up to like 6 years sober. And I can recall like going to like nightclubs to interact with, customers or friends' birthdays or whatever. And they'd be like, oh, how do you not drink, but you're still laughing and having fun? And I would tell them, because the end of the night, they're like I always call them like a wounded bird, and they're just like flapping around and just idiotic. And I just tell them, I'm just laughing at you, dude.
And they probably thought you were the weirdo. They always think you're the weirdo if you don't drink.
While they're in the bathroom all night fucking doing blow.
Yeah, that's weird. Whack.
Yeah. But, I don't know. I guess my life was really into like purchasing homes and like exotic cars and then clothing, like I always just had tons of brand new clothes and
like rhinestone stuff.
Yeah, like extra gay stuff, bedazzled Christian Audible shirts,
snakeskin boots, big old Pisa belt buckles.
Yeah,
with a black wife beater. So, okay, so you weren't like a druggie. You weren't like me. You weren't like a dope fiend. You were just a party guy. Did you do blow?
Like, not really. But if I was hanging out with, like, some chicks or something and they were into it, I didn't want to be a kook and be like, oh, no, I don't, so I might partake. But, like, I wouldn't do it, like, by myself or with some dudes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, like,
weird.
Super gay.
Hey, no, it's just me, Billy, Todd, Sam. Hey, cruise over, we're going to get 8-ball. We're just all going to kick it.
Yeah.
No girls?
In the bathroom all night.
Just us in the bathroom, talking about what we want to do with our future. So, yeah, it's pretty lame. Coke culture's... I get it, and you're sober for periods of that, so from an outside perspective, you're seeing how ridiculous everybody
it was interesting, though, at that time, too, they had flavored Coke. And I used to tell the dude, I'd be like, bro, this is like some New Jack City thing. Like, you're onto something here, bro. he'd have all these flavors like strawberry, banana, mint. And then I was like,
mint?
Yeah, bro. When it went down your throat, it was like peppermint.
It's like some Butler shit.
And then it was like mint, it was kind of like Coke. It was like like a straight mint green color even. And then I hit him up and I was like, so how are you doing this? And then he basically said they were washing it with Jello, the Jello premix. Like if you're making strawberry Jello, they were washing the cocaine with like some sort of strawberry Jello. But it was interesting, bro. I was like, you might be onto something. Can you get a whole kilo of strawberry? I mean, that would be pretty sick.
You can market it to the youth. Yeah, for sure.
It's like cannabis today, Captain Crunch.
That's great. I've never even seen that. Okay, so we're in 2008 now. Yeah. You're making at the time, I don't know if we got into it last time, I can't recall, but you're making what? Between 1 to 5 a month at this point?
Yeah, like as it really maybe that was when I incorporated more states. So eventually, if I'll just kind of throw it out there, eventually I went into, let me try to even think if I can think of all of them, right? There's so many. I used to sell bud and, some of it would drop into Seattle and it would get distributed in Seattle, in California, St. Louis, Cleveland, Ohio, was it Cleveland, Ohio? And there was another area of Ohio.
Columbus?
No, I forget. So I eventually tried to do 2 areas of Ohio, but the secondary area didn't really pop. It was really like Cleveland. So then it was Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta, St. Louis, North Carolina, Alabama, New Jersey, Boston, Maine, New York, and I think that's it. So those are, and then I was sending it at some point through a different form of transportation to Hawaii.
Now I know that another substance comes into your story in a little bit.
Yeah.
But at that time, just out of curiosity, would you ever sell other kinds of drugs on the side?
No.
It was just strictly herb.
Yeah.
Okay. Like not even extracts? Because I know that
that wasn't even really around yet.
Hashless, right?
It's weird because one load the Canadians sent me a bunch of bricks of hash, and they were in kilos. And it just looked like a big old chocolate Hershey bar, dude. It was like, like this thick and maybe like this wide. And I forget how much they were. I want to say $5,000 or whatever for a brick of hash. And back then, it was kind of like something foreign. And I would try to drop them.
Hard to move.
Yeah,
hard to move.
No one wanted them.
I remember
hash.
What is that? That's one drug that, I was not saying.
Nowadays, maybe people would be stoked on it. But back then,
hash was hard to move. I remember that we would get stuck with it. Like even keef or hash, even though I was on a much smaller level, like I get like a 5-pack of hash, 5 units, 5 pounds of hash, and you couldn't move it. And you're like, oh yeah, it's $30 a gram for this, and people would be like,
yeah.
And like that's all the way up.
It even looked kind of like sketchy, like if you get cracked with a fucking brick of hash, like you know what I mean? It just looked fucking like it was way more gnarly,
Yeah, yeah. It looks like a drug. It's a brick.
Yeah,
it's not some plant. And back then, nowadays the laws are much more liberalized, but back then any kind of concentrate was considered the same as getting caught with a brick of cocaine, at least on the state level. Yeah. I know friends that got felonies for simple possessions of hash back then. So yeah, it's just a different climate then.
Right.
Go on. Where are we now? We're 2008 still.
Yeah. Transitioning
out of that.
So I eventually bought my pilot a bigger plane. He eventually brought in other people. It's like, hey, I know another pilot. He has a plane. Because the pilot would, let's say he would leave California, and the entire, there and back, the whole, hitting all of these locations, sometimes could take, a week or more, because it takes like a day or two to get there. He's dropping in Detroit, and then the next day he's going to Chicago. Spend the day in Chicago, and then the next day he's heading over to. Sometimes he might have to wait because he wouldn't always fly at nighttime. It's just a daytime thing. And so he would head over to Atlanta. Sometimes maybe like not all the money is right, So I would tell him, hey, the dude's waiting for more, or he would drop a load in Atlanta, let's say, and I would say, give those dudes a few days to go and off some of them. You know what I mean? Like it just got there on a Saturday. I tell the pilot, hang out till Tuesday or Wednesday, so they can pop some off and get more money to bring back.
Then he would okay.
Yeah, so he sometimes would just post up, at the hotel.
Because I know that I have a lot of friends that sold like mass quantities like that, and they would always tell me that it was harder sometimes to move the money back than it was the product. But you're saying that your pilot was pretty much just a courier on both sides.
Yeah,
He would bring the product, collect, and then come back.
Yeah.
Would he get paid for the cash or just on
just on the bud?
Okay.
And then I would pay him all of the expenses. Like if he was in a hotel in Atlanta for 5 days, that he doesn't pay for anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
His entire trip is free.
And like, how do you? This is another cop question. How do you get hooked up with a pilot like that? I mean, you don't put a fucking job listing in the newspaper. Like, how do you find somebody that's 60 years old that's down for illicit pilot work? Like, how do you even get hooked up with somebody like that?
There was a buddy in Seattle, and he just kind of proposed it to me. He's like, hey, I know this older guy, because I was looking for means of transportation. Prior to having, the airplane like I described, I was wheeling it out. Not me personally, but I was paying a dude that I had out in Vegas area. I paid him a flat rate of $20,000 a month to go and just go anywhere and do anything I told him to do. So he had no for this many pounds you go here. I just said $20,000 a month, and you go and do wherever I need you to go. And it worked out good for him. He did, $20,000's good, and it worked out good for me.
Yeah.
And so once that's what kind of led to the feds tracking me, is that guy eventually got cut, got clipped along the way, in a ride. He got rolled on.
Do you know? Okay, so somebody flipped on him.
Yeah, at some point, somehow they
landed somewhere. And...
Yeah. So I would always, at that point, I was using him to go sometimes even pick up loads. I would oftentimes, too, I started working with a big rig. And so we would crate them in big wooden crates. And so this is first, originally, I had him driving them himself, right? And then it went from him to a big rig. And I hired a construction dude, and he would make full-on crates. And then I started having big rigs, taking them out to these different areas. And along the way, a big rig must have gotten, clipped. And the dude who I was paying a flat fee of $20,000 a month, he was a fucking drug addict. He was doing speed and all this type of shit. And he was supposed to fly from Vegas to Detroit and meet the fucking big rig.
All twacked out.
Yeah.
Flying.
And no, he didn't make it. He's like, I didn't make it. And so eventually the big rig dropped it at a random warehouse. So when the dude rolled in the next morning, he went to the random warehouse, loaded up, his van, and as soon as he pulled out of the little warehouse, he was surrounded, right? And so at that point, they said, that what they always do, that this was, I think, local police. They were probably hit him up, to, help himself out. And so the dude actually went and took the load to my customers. And so it was a whole orchestrated thing, he drops them off, and now he got someone else fucking busted, right?
Sounds like a good dude.
Yeah, right? So basically at that time, I kind of just like stopped. I was like, paranoid that I was gonna get, busted or whatever, right? And the guy randomly like showed up at my house. He didn't live in my area. He just like popped up one day, and I was like, "What are you doing here?" You know what I mean? Like, it's over with. Like, we no community. You know what I mean? Like, so then
don't lead them back. Don't lead the wolves back.
Yeah. Like, me and you don't talk or don't do anything anymore. It's like, we already know. You don't fuck with people like that.
You're not even tan anymore.
Right. So he came in, and I remember even telling him, like, lift up your shirt, like, let me see to make sure you're not having anything. He's like, oh, I had to do it, and I didn't tell him about you, and, I need money to cover the lawyer. And so at that point, I wasn't sure, like, how do I go about it?
So he inadvertently admitted to you that he had flipped?
No, I already knew, because my customer got fucking hit. And so everybody reported back to me.
And he had the balls to come up to you and ask you to pay for his legal fees?
Yeah. So I really didn't know what to do, but I didn't want him to obviously have it affect me. Because at that point, I still had my local business and I still had like money that I was making, So I wasn't sure really like how to fuck with this dude. So I basically like took a break, stopped doing it, and one of my bros hit me up and said, hey, I have a pilot. And so after kind of like not doing it for a few months, everything kind of seemed like okay. And so I was like, fuck it. Even the dudes in Detroit said that they had, like when one dude falls, another one takes over. And they were like a gang also. And so they basically said, we have a new dude in place and we're ready to go. So I think I waited maybe 8 or 9 months to kind of fire it back up. And that's when I went from the big rigs to an airplane. But eventually, through that dude doing whatever he did on, cooperating, he just couldn't hold it. And eventually I read in my paperwork that he was paid $1,100 to go from Vegas to drive up to my house and say, oh, he lives right there.
Dude, I'm sending that guy a friend request on Facebook.
As
soon as we're done with this interview,
yeah,
I want to be friends with that fool.
Yeah.
Sounds super solid, dude.
For whatever karma reason, the dude is no longer alive. So,
Man, it's crazy.
So that's how I got the pilot. As a buddy was just like, hey, I know a guy. And he put us in touch. And my friend didn't even want anything out of it. He's like, you guys just do your thing.
So you shut everything down for a minute? Out of
probably
fear.
Like a good 9 months.
And let me ask you something, because when I was selling drugs, I was selling heroin. So heroin is like they're a little more aggressive with trying to bust that. And I remember going to sleep every night, literally pacing around my room. I was smoking crack at the time, but I'd pace around my room and I'd look out the window, and I remember just this like anxiety and impending sense of doom, thinking, not knowing if they were going to come kick my door down in the morning. Oh no,
it's terrible.
You were in that perpetual fear?
Of course.
Yeah. Because your circle was compromised.
My house was as clean as you could be, dude. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't doing anything but like working on a construction of a house.
Tanning.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to go to. So no, yeah, I shut everything down, and my house was as clean as could be. And then, the Canadians kept saying, when are you ready to go? When can we go? And they were really pushing me to go again anyways, because it's affecting everybody and their money.
Yeah, no, definitely. I get it. Wow. That's okay. So now you meet this guy, 60 years old.
And, he was like, I'm an ex-Green Beret. I have ice in my veins. Did
he have a dagger with a snake coiled around it tattoo?
No, I don't recall, bro.
Those
he probably had a Rambo knife. So he seemed like a legit dude, and I actually, at that point, after taking a hiatus, I really needed to get back to the money. I was
going to ask you that. So when you walked away from it, what kind of safe nest did you have? You had money invested in the house.
Yeah.
So it wasn't liquid at that point. Did you have any liquid cash, or
Oh no, I for sure had cash.
But it was drying up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, like I think it was close to like 9 months that I didn't really do anything, at least out of state. I probably did make a couple like local moves, you know, but it was basically just completely like shut it down. Let's let it cool off.
Did you notice your life? Like, did it get to a point where you couldn't facilitate your lifestyle anymore, or it was like
no? But to me, like being a dope dealer was also an addiction.
Yeah,
and so it's like I had to go back. I didn't really know how to even like not do it. If that makes any sense.
No, of course it does. Yeah, I did it for years. I understand. You get addicted to the money, the power, the freedom.
And then, you know, the dudes up top, the plug, you know, they kept saying, you know, let's go. And they didn't know that I was doing the out of town and all that had happened.
You weren't supposed to go out of town.
Yeah.
That was like
I never had to like sit down with them and ask them if it was a blessing. Like, are you cool with me, you know, potentially putting all of this at more of a risk and taking it way further away than, you know, just having it locally, you know?
Yeah.
They might not be cool with that. They might say, well, that's a huge risk to, you know, wheel it down. Eventually, I did, through a sit down, explain to them that I was using an airplane and this was my new thing, because here's the thing. They started saying, they would hit me all the time. Where's money? When are you turning it in? Where are you turning in money in? And so sometimes the money, like large amounts, were far away and I wasn't going to have them for a while. And they would be like, do you have anything? Do you have this? And do you have that? I was like, well, I don't have much, because literally they don't know that I have money in Detroit and Chicago and Atlanta and North Carolina and all of these places. At one point, I literally, if I backtracked and counted them, when the pilot was all like super fired up, I had like 14 or 15 states. And then we recruited 2 more pilots. So when I was talking earlier, when we kind of backtracked on the story, the pilot knew that, you know, like as he was out, I needed to get another one coming in, you know what I mean, to kind of move money faster and then get, you know, the work out to these areas quicker. So by the time eventually when I got arrested, I had multiple airplanes and multiple pilots, you know, like hovering the United States, you know, in and out and back and forth, you know?
Yeah.
And then some, eventually once the Canadians were hip to it, they started saying, well, can you move some for our people? Can you take some from, you know, the Canadian border up on Seattle? If we shoot them to you, can you get them to Chicago? And then I started charging them, you know, money on top of like my pilot. Like if I said, I think I told them it's, you know, like $175 per pound. So my pilot would get his $100.
And you'd walk away with
75.
Just for
throwing theirs on board.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So then I became like, you know, like more of a transporter for their crew too, you know, which really kind of beefed up some even more money.
Gotcha. Okay. What's with this? You throwing signals, or why are you smiling like that?
I don't know. These are fun old stories, you know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah, transporting, also known as
transgender porting.
Transgender boarding.
I think that's like a teleport. No, so what happened was when the dude eventually got caught, right? He probably didn't say anything about me for a long time.
And when you say get caught, do you know it was a federal sting?
No, when he went to Detroit and picked up that load, it was like local.
Okay. So
local police.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think at some point, you know, they probably asked him to, you know, help him out more or backtrack it or whatever the case was.
When he had a vagina.
Eventually, when I got the paperwork, I had another load that was sitting up in Atlanta, and we didn't know what to do with it. And when I got the paperwork on my case, they were taking photographs of like the freight company that I was using, the big rigs and shit. You know?
Yeah.
So
that's scary. And I mean, we've both been through the federal system. It's very scary when you get your discovery in that system. When you see like really what they had pictures of me like in parking lots, like handing over like bags to other people. Like this is like a 6-month, year period where they're taking pictures, like aerial shots. Like I'm like,
for those of you trying to do it, bro, it's really gnarly. Like
especially
mine was
with technology,
extremely extensive. So when I went through my discovery, I believe I had 5,000 minutes of wiretaps. And this is just, I'm trying to relive some of these numbers. And I think there was like 1,100 photographs, and then quite a few videos, and then body wires. Eventually a dude was wearing a body wire. So the same thing with me. I had pictures. I still have all the compact discs. I can pull them up.
It comes in like that it comes in like a folder of different CDs, right?
Yeah, I had my lawyer send them to my family before I got out. And so they have pictures of me standing in front of airplanes. They have the pilot loading up. The pilot eventually, they put GPS trackers on his airplanes and all the other airplanes. And they eventually even, through the indictment, arrested his wife. Because one time he was out of town, and at the house he had his airplane hangar, and he knew like a load was coming in. And he was like, "Hey, can you go to the hangar and open up the hangar?" And they were filming it the whole entire time. So the hangar had like cameras on it. Yeah. And for those who of any interest, so sometimes what they'll do, and one of the ones they did, is they will literally install a camera on a neighboring building. So I have some where you can see like a big rig and the camera is like 2 or 3 buildings over.
Yeah, they do the same thing for me.
Yeah. And then it's just there staring the whole time.
Yeah.
So it's running. And then
it has like a scrolling timer on it. So when you see the photos, it'll say like the date. It'll say like March 6, 2020. Well, this one was a
video. But
but it'll have the scrolling. So when you see it, you know exactly when that surveillance was occurring. And if they have photographs, it's the same thing. From what I saw from it.
So for those of you dope dealing, it's not going to just be a dude in the car. Literally at night or whatever the scenario is, it could be a camera up on a telephone pole that points to your house, and they literally can see your every movement. They don't have to be sitting in front of your house, because most people think like, oh, I'm under surveillance. There's a weird car, tinted windows,
a van where they have like some cone.
And I used to know those cars back then. You teach yourself what cars to look for. Sorry. So
now they have drones, and they have microchip recorders, and they're mining all of our data. I mean, general rule of thumb: don't ever say anything on the phone. Nothing. We're not saying to sell drugs, but just for educational purposes, they listen to everything. When you're like, you're being paranoid, when people are like that, you're wrong. They are listening to everything.
So there was one dude in particular who I served time with, and he literally, a couple dudes actually, literally their entire case was a phone conversation.
Phone count.
Yeah.
Charge. It's called a phone count.
Or it's just labeled a conspiracy.
But you can be there's that can go into a conspiracy, but there's an independent charge called a phone count. I'm sure you came across that in your time in the feds, people with phone counts.
I've never heard that terminology, phone count.
Yeah.
But I always heard it's like conspiracy or whatever.
Well, yeah, a phone call can get you intertwined in a conspiracy, but I've seen people that they're like, well, don't sign for the conspiracy. Here's this independent phone count charge that carries 2 years instead of a 5 to 40 mandatory minimum or 10 to life mandatory minimum.
And then there was one dude, and you may know that maybe your fans don't. So in the federal system, if you don't take a plea agreement and you actually say, "Oh, I'm going to go to trial,"
double,
dude, you literally get like double, triple the amount of sentence. So like if they're saying, "Hey, Sin, we want you to sign this plea agreement. We'll potentially offer you, 10 years to life," right? And if I say, "Nope, not going to sign it," and most of the time the feds win about, I think, over 90%.
It's like 97, I think. 97 or 98.
Of all people that go to trial. And I felt bad for some people that I knew. One dude in particular, he literally is like, I was like, "How much time did you get?" He got 30 years. for a drug case.
Because he took it to trial,
Exactly.
lost. Probably were offering him 10 to life. He's like, fuck that.
Yeah.
Takes it to trial, gets 30.
And he literally would have got 10.
Yeah, I already know. They come with you to 10 to life, which is absurd because you're doing 87%. They say 85. It's actually 87%. Let me interject for a second. I may have brought this up before, but it coincides with what you're saying. The worst thing I ever saw happen to somebody when I was in federal prison, case-wise, is there was this guy, his name was Chubbs. I think he was from the Avenues in Los Angeles, which is a Southsider gang. But this guy lived with his brother. His brother was a meth dealer. They only had him on one phone call. Somebody had called this guy Chubbs, and they were looking for his brother. They said, hey, is your brother home? This was on a landline. Chubbs has said, no, he's going to be home either at 7 or 8 o'clock tonight. That's all I said. Later, a conspiracy charge, the indictment went down. Now, when Sinister's talking about 97, 98% conviction rate in the feds, the reason being is on the federal system, it's a little different than the state system. To be indicted federally, there has to be a frank evidential hearing, and there has to be evidence that's provided to a grand jury. That grand jury needs to decide if the indictment's going to go through. So if you really think about it, you're already convicted.
Totally.
Right when you're indicted.
You can't even defend yourself.
A grand jury has already said you're guilty to indict you. So now you're indicted. If you take it to trial, you're going to lose. So this particular case, and then we'll get back to what you're saying, but I think it's important to be emphatic on this point.
Because its prison reform is gnarly, dude. Some of these dudes get broken off.
This guy in particular, my brother's not going to be home until 7 or 8 tonight. His brother gets indicted on a meth conspiracy. They bring this guy in, this guy Chubbs. Now, I met him at MDCLA like in 2009. And what had happened is they said that when he was on the phone, when he said he's not going to be home until 7 or 8 o'clock, they got some drug lexicon specialists, some drug verbiage specialists to say that meant 7 to 8 kilos of crystal meth, right? And they're like, we can give you 20 years for that, but we'll give you a plea agreement for 10 to life, mandatory minimum 10 to life. This guy Chubbs is like, fuck that. I'm not signing for that. You don't have anything on me. You caught me with no dope.
Which most people do. Even when I got arrested, I was like, no, I'm not. You didn't catch me with anything.
Because it's ghost dope. This was a particular case of ghost dope. So they offered him 10 to life. Chubbs is like, I'm going to state, or I'm going to trial, because most of these guys are used to going to state. If you take it to the box, which is another way of saying taking it to trial, in the state, you have a chance to win. In the feds, you honestly don't.
Yeah.
You know, it's so slim.
A lot of people actually win.
So this guy Chubbs takes it to trial. They offered him a plea for 10 to life for just saying he won't be home until 7 or 8. They give him 30 years in federal prison when he loses trial. And, like, he got "fuck the feds" tattooed on his forehead. And that's the most, like, extreme example I can think of. But it just reinforces what you're saying.
I know 2 guys, they were on phone calls. One guy got 11. Another guy, I think, got 20 for going to trial. And it was literally like 2 phone calls, a phone call, whatever, right? And it's crazy that America is the only country that does conspiracy. So a lot of people don't know, and maybe in the YouTube world, this is something that they could learn. So if Ryan and I go to Starbucks, and I say, yo, bro, I got this and this going down. And he's like, oh, yeah, no, I'm interested. But maybe the prices don't work out. Like maybe he's like, oh, my bro needs it at this price. And that's not the right price. Well, technically, if anything is being like recorded or surveillance, we're already hit.
For conspiracy.
Just for talking about it. And nothing even has to interact. I could just be like, oh, dude doesn't want to pay that. It's over. And then I walk away, and even if it was a one-time thing, like I've never done a dope deal before, perhaps you could potentially be hit.
Which starts at 5 to 40, and then there's a 10 to life bracket. Like, hey, how much for that dick?
Super lame.
Oh,
dude.
it's $300 for this dick. No, I'm cool. That's way too expensive for that dick. Then you get possession with intent to suck, and then they turn into a conspiracy.
Next thing you know, you're caught up for manslaughter.
Manslaughter.
Just tell everybody about your other indictment, dude. Receiving swollen property.
No. I beat that. It's non-conviction. So what? So we're gonna end this video. We're gonna do a third part of it. This is the second part of
the third part gets juicy
Sinister Monopoly saga.
Yeah.
Eventually transition
Should
into
we discuss, because we're already, because the motherfucking saga continues.
Oh yeah, I don't care about
who
cussing.
does that? It's like an NWA line or something.
Wu-Tang.
Wu-Tang.
Wu-Tang. The woo-woo. We're gonna get into your transition to the cocaine industry.
Yeah.
And how you became a de facto.
Don't use the word transition, because today, you know what I'm saying? It means something totally different, dude. You know?
Yeah, he transitioned. So we're gonna.
Tell us about your transition.
Tell us about your journey, dude.
Yeah,
we're gonna get into Sinister Monopoly's transition into the cocaine world.
Yeah.
And ultimately his experience in federal prison and how he became a contemporary pop artist that has a following.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Much love. Like, comment, subscribe. Patreon.com/Ryan Leone. Go to Sinister's page. It's just starting it. Sinister Monopoly. Link will be in the pinned comments and the description. Love you all. Say it.
I want to see some comments too. Like, I'm going to hit the comments and interact. So definitely leave us a comment. Throw some likes. Let's talk about it.
We came up with the catchphrase. Say it.
Oh, suck it easy.
Don't pass go.
No, that's too. I don't know if that's going to work, bro.
Suck it
Don't
easy.
Don't pass go.
Suck it easy, and you know what I'm going to say. Palabra.